I'm looking forward to tonight's presentation. As I said, Cemil has some pretty interesting stuff. I think you'll be very fascinated by it and how it comes about and how it got there. He'll be telling us those stories. But a little bit of a bio. Cemil Betanov, he's the editor of the Error Freaks and Oddities Collector. That's the publication of the Errors Collectors Club. And he maintains its website, and that's EFOC.org. In addition to that, he's a member of the Lancaster Philatelic Society, the Postal Stationery Society, American Topical Society, United States Stationery Society. He collects newspaper wrappers and art on stamps. Also enjoys sharing what he's learned. You've been here with us several times sharing, so we appreciate that. He has a rather demanding daytime job working in information technology and specializes in cybersecurity. As he said, don't click on the link in the email that came from your bank. Type the address into the bank's website directly into your browser window. I think, Cemil, too, with the newsletter, Charlie's been writing about this is cybersecurity issues and AI and all those things. I've had about a dozen notices from Comcast that I need to update something from my mailbox. I just don't trust it. They might turn me off because it was real, but I've written back to the people individually on different email, not returning that, and said, tell me what I need to do. I've done that with about 4 of them, all different names, and never heard back a word. So
they're tired of hearing from you.
Yeah,
that's it.
It sure looks real, and it's so hard to tell. But so anytime you're ready, Cemil, if you want to share your screen.
I'm ready.
Do you want questions before, during, after? It doesn't matter.
It's okay to have them during. That's fine. If it becomes a conversation, then we may postpone it to the end.
We'll cut them off at the knees.
That's right.
So yeah, just wave your hand and shout. Okay, then if the rest of us can go on mute, and Cemil,
I'm going to share my screen now. Let me know when you can see my screen. This is the Opera House in Buenos Aires, by the way, in the background.
Wow.
Just in case.
We're good.
Okay, I'm not even sure if there's a presentation mode. Probably it does, but I don't know where it is. Anyway, I think we see enough. So essentially, I am affiliated with EFOCC, and we have a website. For a second, I'm going to show it, okay? This is the website, and on that website, we have one area that is called Error Freaks and Oddities, okay? So if you go back to the main site, then there is on the right, you look at, there is here a tile that takes you to this. This is an essay by John Hodgner, and it is mostly based on US stamps, and essentially it goes, by error and variation. It tries to impose a taxonomy on this, on the various types of errors. So at some point, what I would like to do is to have something similar for newspaper wrappers. I'll also probably at some point we would like to have one in general on postal stationery, but I think that newspapers wrappers are quite different than other postal stationery, such as postal cards and aerograms and letter cards, whatever. So I'm going to go through, I have about 40 slides here that I'm going to go through to show different type errors that come up. And actually, I'm amazed how many types there are, and I can tell you that this is not a comprehensive list, okay? Most of the material is from my own collection, but some of it, like this one, is not, because this is extremely rare. So I'm starting with an invert. Why? Because the inverts are the kings of the EFOs, right? Everybody knows about inverts. Everybody has heard about the inverted Jenny, right? So it's I'm some kind of surprised that there are relatively few inverts that I could find, but this is for sure one. It's from an article that appeared in Postal Stationery, the UPSS publication. And what is interesting here is you will see that this has two parts. There is a colored outside part, and then there is an embossed inside part, right? This, and what is, it's hard to say which one is inverted, right? Because there is no reference, I believe. So this is here on the right with the blue. You see the inverted one. This is the 6 centavo issue, and the inside, the embossing is looks okay, but the outside is inverted, and on the left is essentially how it should look. Now, this is I'm not going to stay on every slide as long, hopefully, but this is one of the so-called CBAC issues. We will see a few of them in this presentation. So this is from Salvador. So it is a Central American country. CBAC, I don't know if you heard of him, but he was essentially a stationer that had an store in downtown Manhattan. And at some point, he made an agreement with a US printing house. I think it was the Hamilton Banknote Corporation. And then he went to the individual countries, Central American countries, with an offer they could not refuse. I'll print you and supply you for free all your stamps and postal stationery. Now, there was a gotcha to it, and the gotcha is actually the gotcha is here. There is a year, if you see, 1890. So the way he structured this was that he would send the country in November all the stuff that they needed, the postal stationery, the stamps, and so on, for the following year, and they would start to sell this on the 1st of January. Come December 31, they would stop selling it, and on January 1, they would start selling the next year's. Now, for all the remainders, as well as for the dies and all, he had the rights. They became his property. So the way he made up his money, basically, was by essentially selling, the remainders to collectors, and he could also print additional ones because if there was demand, because he had all the equipment, and he got the dies legally, basically. So as a result, we never know when we see an CBAC issue whether it is something that he made up afterwards or that was a real error. The only way to determine is if you find one that has been, has a date stamp, but I have never seen one actually. So this is one of the CBAC inverts. This is, now we are going to color omitted errors. So I'm going to show a few color omitted errors. This is a US wrapper. It is, I'm guessing, a true error. But, and as you see, on the lower right is the indicium, the stamp, how it's supposed to look. On the wrapper, so it has two parts, just like the other one, it has two parts. It is hard to see here, but there is an embossing, and then there is the brown colored die. So on the wrapper that is shown, there is the brown color has been omitted, so there is only the embossing. I just made a larger, I put a larger picture on the lower left, so you can see that better, hopefully. Clearly, it's kind of hard to see that. But the next question is whether this is a philatelic use or a true commercial use. We will see later errors that are truly commercially used, but this one, I'm not sure. I cannot make a decision. It for sure has some wear and tear. It looks like it's gone through the mail, but there is some doubt in my mind. Now we are coming to another colorimeter error. This is another CBAC issue, okay? So, by the way, when you have an embossing like this one, and also like the previous wrapper that I showed, when the color is missing, you have only the embossing, it's referred to as an albino. So this is an albino, and clearly you can see what is missing. This is also a very rare error. There is a reference to it. It is on an internet site that I borrowed. So I think it's very interesting. The person who put together the website, who is long gone, unfortunately, claimed that it was unique. Now, the next colorimeter error is a Mexico wrapper, and I am reasonably certain this is a true error. As you can see at the top, you have a normal one, and so you can imagine that this wrapper was printed in two passes. The first pass was where they printed everything but the indicium, and the second pass was where they printed the indicium, which is basically the value, right? Which is usually it's the controlled paper. So on the example that I have here, the indicium has not been printed, and this is I haven't seen too many of these either. They come up for sale once in a while, and I know that about 10 years ago I missed quite a few nice errors, Mexican errors, that I regret since then not having bought them, but this one was one that I bought. Next thing is we are going to go to the opposite, basically, where there is too much printing, double or multiple prints. So here, this is a straightforward one. This is a US wrapper from the 1800s. And as you see, clearly it has been printed twice. The embossing is printed once. Unfortunately, it's impossible to see here. Here is another one, very similar. It's Scott 303. It's a US wrapper. It has also gone through the printing equipment apparently twice. Now here is another multiple print. This is very interesting. If you look at the wrapper on the right, first you really don't see what's happening. But if you look really carefully, there is here an embossing. On the left, upper left, I magnified that area, that detail of the wrapper, and the embossing is a little bit easier to see. And finally, in the middle bottom, I showed the albino embossing. So this is also multiple print, obviously, if you consider that, and I consider that the embossing is also akin to another color or another printing. So this has been multiple times it has gone through the printing or embossing apparatus. Now here, next thing here is another one that I don't have, unfortunately. This was also shown in Postal Stationery, the publication of the UPSS. It's another CBAC issue. And it is similar to the previous one in the sense that the printing of the indicium is okay, but there is another basically embossing. This embossing is very interesting. I know it is hard to see, but essentially, if you look really carefully at the magnified embossing here, you will notice that there is an embossing here, but in the middle, it is flat. There is no embossing. So this is the case. What this shows us, okay, is that apparently the embossing was done in two operations. First, they had the embossing of the outside of the frame, and then they had the embossing of the inside, which was a different dye, and finally they probably printed the colored part. So one thing that's interesting here is that one advantage, one nice thing about collecting EFOs is that often you start to think, how did this happen? And sometimes looking by the EFOs, you can deduce things about how things were printed, how things were manufactured. We will have another very interesting example later. And this is actually Wayne Manus, who is one of the luminaries in this area in the US. It was he had printed this, and the way he put it is apparently he also was guessing. He didn't know for a fact that, or he didn't know maybe before then that the embossing was printed in two stages. So that is interesting that, even he learned something by looking at the printed wrapper. Now, often on wrappers you find overprints. Actually, one day maybe I should show a presentation on wrapper overprints. They are also interesting. Here, there is a muestra, means specimen in Spanish. This is a wrapper from Argentina. And as you can see, the overprint is clearly double printed. Next, we are going to color errors. This is here, essentially the British wrappers, they had a habit of often when postal rates changed, of basically adding another indicium to an existing wrapper so that they would complete it to have the correct postage in indicia. Also, it was possible that when and essentially these are stamped to order wrappers. So you took your paper to the post office and the post office printed this indicia on your wrapper, okay? So these combinations are catalog numbered, and the upper pair is essentially a correct one, and it has the number WS131, whatever that may be. I'm sorry, the upper one I don't know, the lower one has W131, and the reason is, if you look at the right, at the CC on the right, they are both for 1/2 pence. However, the top one is a different color than the lower one. The top one is turquoise, the lower one is in blue. And actually, turquoise was the correct color. So whenever they used on a wrapper, on a stamp to order wrapper, 1/2 pence indicium, they printed it in turquoise. Only for this one type of wrapper, WS131, this was printed in blue. So it's a color error. This is very different than shades, a different shade. We will get into that also later, hopefully. Now here, I'm going to go into miscuts. I have a few of them. The first one is an Argentinian miscut, and you can right away see what happens is that apparently when it goes through the cutting operation, the paper was somewhat skewed. So what came out basically diagonal. And also, if you look carefully, on the right, you will see Repubblica. That is supposed to be on the left side of the wrapper, so it is also shifted to the left, to the right. So the interesting part here is that this is almost certainly a commercial use. So the interesting part is that this didn't bother really whoever was using it. Chances are that they went to the post office and bought a stack of wrappers, and that was hidden in the middle. And they didn't want to waste the value that this wrapper represented, so they just used it. This is not uncommon, in particular in older philatelic items. Here is another miscut, also an Argentinian wrapper. This is kind of more conventional. The paper moved only sideways, kind of only sideways, but if you look at this carefully, you will see that here on the left side, the piece of the indicium, the right side, it's probably a little bit hard to see, but it is not completely parallel to the left border, which means that there was however slightly, there was a shift also in that direction. So clearly something went wrong. Now we go to another Mexican wrapper that is also a miscut. You can see what happened here. They essentially, one side has a flap and has this triangular cut side. The British call it the chamfer, I believe. And in the upper one is the normal one. In the lower one, that was turned around 180 degrees. And therefore, now the flap, and in the back of this flap, there is ink, there is the glue. The glue and the flap are on the left side. Now, we are going to another category, which is excess ink. Now, ink is, as you know, is kind of liquid, and it has a way of getting where it is not supposed to get, right? So here, clearly in the printing apparatus, there was too much ink when this was printed. It is hardly possible to say that what it is, and that's why on the upper left, I put a normal one. So you can see that this is US W401, a US wrapper. And something actually went quite wrong here, because it's not that there is also excess ink, but also there is an extra impression of the indicium, as you see, a partial extra impression. That's kind of also interesting. And this was also commercially used. So as you see, it is addressed. Whoever received it just ripped apart the wrapper. It's very often happened with wrappers. Unfortunately, most of the wrappers, if you collect wrappers, most of the wrappers you collect are kind of have been kind of torn. So another thing that's very interesting, on the right side, you see now the back of this wrapper. So this is called the set-off, or some people like to call it an offset. A set-off happens when essentially a wrapper is placed during the printing operation on top of another wrapper, and that happens with stamps too, by the way, a lot, on top of another sheet where the color hasn't dried yet. And therefore, you get an impression of the indicium on the back of the item, in this case, on the back of the wrapper. In this case, this is particularly evident because there was already too much excess ink in the printing plate. So therefore, there was the set-off is also kind of messed up.
Cemil,
Yes.
on the second image there down at the lower left,
Yes.
it's interesting that that faint image is actually a negative image, because you notice the 1 is inked, whereas on the normal stamp, the 1 is not inked.
Yes, that is correct. It's interesting. It's we have to think about how that could have happened. Thank you for pointing that out, Dave. Any theory?
No.
We'll talk about it. So here is another case, this time a Nicaragua wrapper. By the way, this wrapper has also, at the top, you will see a year, and I believe it is also a CBEC issue. So on the left side is the normal printing. On the right side, you will see there is here accessing all over the wrapper. And actually, this wrapper will show up again later because I have a separate section where I show set-offs. And this wrapper has in the back also a set-off, so we'll get there. Now, we are going now to the opposite, where there is not too much ink, but too little ink, where the ink is drying on the printing plate. And in this case, as you see, this is a Honduran wrapper, and this one also has unprinted areas. And these unprinted areas, in my opinion, are consistent with ink starvation. Not always when you have an unprinted area in a wrapper or in a stamp for that matter, whatever it might be, is it ink starvation? There are other reasons, we'll get into that. But in this case, I do believe that it was ink starvation. Now, there are other cases. This is kind of more controversial, but I mentioned before with the British wrappers that there was this stamp to order capability where you could take your paper to the post office and they would print the stamps on them, the indicia. This is also the Austrians used that big time. This is an Austrian wrapper. And as you see, you can see here the indicium barely. And however, you know, it is debatable really how much that is negligent or how much it is bad design. Because if it is negligence, that means that they didn't put enough ink into the printing plate. If it is bad design, that means all of them are always like that, which I always wonder how it would happen. However, I can tell you this indicium, I have seen it many times, just as light. So there are questions in my mind about whether this is intentional in terms of not being really an EFO or whether it is indeed an EFO. So between too much ink and too little ink, there are cases where you have uneven printing. On one side, there is too much ink, on another side, there is not enough. This is a Tasmanian wrapper, also stamped to order. In Tasmania, in Australian states, they had also stamped to order facilities. And as you can see, it is kind of sloppy. It didn't matter. They still, you know, they didn't say, oh, this is not well printed. We are going to discard it, to destroy it. They just gave it back to whoever bought the paper, and that person proceeded to basically sell it to somebody else. These were printed for a stationer who had these produced at the post office and then sold them to third parties. So again, they just thought that it was just fine to use it as it is. Most of this type of wrappers with, you know, with this newspaper only overprint here, they were actually printed like that. They are kind of defective. Now, from uneven printing, we are going to color shifts. So color shifts, generally you have them when you have there are at least two colors in the printing operation, because if there is a single color and the stamp is not where you expect it to be, it's a miscut, right? But if there are two colors and one of them is okay, the other one is misplaced, that is a shift, a color shift. This Mexican wrapper, as I mentioned before, these Mexican wrappers were printed in two passes. And actually here you can see that the rest of the color, the color on the rest of the wrapper is kind of different than the color of the indicium, even though both are green. So this is another indication that they were printed separately. And as you can see, the indicium is shifted. So this is a print shift. Print shifts are very common. Again, here is another case. This is here South Africa. And these 4 items, I have them actually on 4 complete wrappers. 2 of them are shown, I'm showing the background. I didn't want to show all of them because they just took up too much space on the sheet. But as you can see, the center, the black color, was shifted relative to the frame, which was in red. So these you find occasionally, but I don't think that they are very frequent, at least not when the color shift is as well defined. From color shifts, we go to print increases. So in paper creases, what happens is that essentially at some point during the operation, during the printing operation, or maybe before, the color, the thing is somewhat slightly folded, the paper, and it creates a crease. And in this particular case, this happened before the wrapper was ever printed. And then the wrapper was printed, as you can see on the upper here, on the upper right. This shows us that the printing happened while the crease was still closed, basically. Not only that, the crease wasn't open when they addressed it. This is also a commercially used one, so that's nice. But after everything, after the color, the wrapper was probably recovered, and at that point somebody opened it and realized that there was a printing crease. It's a small one, but I like it because it has gone through all the processes without being discovered, and it is also commercially used. So here is another paper crease, but this is not, this doesn't affect the indicium. It affects only the writing on the wrapper. These were printed, I believe, all in one operation. So the whole thing was printed in a single operation, the indicium, the heading, as well as the instructions. So in this case, we can say that it is a crease because it was opened, and you can see that it ended up in a discontinuous printing. This is now paper fold. Paper fold can be really fun. Dave Hunt had lots of stamp with paper fold, so I like them. But in this case, the wrapper was folded. The sheet on which the wrapper was printed was folded, and the wrapper was cut, and then it was reopened afterwards, and this strange shape came up. Stamps are nice because they have an emboss. They are perforated, and the perforation ends up in becoming crazy perforations. Here, unfortunately, we don't have that. Again, this is on an Argentinian wrapper. Now we are going to look at unprinted areas in wrapper design. So let me put in that the disclaimer that this is not something I have. Years ago, I saved it from the internet. It's something that I had intended to buy, but then I missed out on it and I don't remember whose it was, so I'm even unable to provide a reference. But so I think most of the indicium is missing. The only thing I can imagine something like that would happen is that the sheet folded over in such a way, because this is very straight. This is so straight, this diagonal border, that it looks like there was another sheet of paper that was on top of it during the printing operation. That's a theory that I have. I have no way of printing it in particular. Unfortunately, I haven't seen, or I'm not familiar with what happened to the rest of this wrapper. Now here, this is also a non-printed area in paper wrapper design, but it is kind of very similar to what we had before. And first I thought it was actually a crease, but it is not. The way I noticed it is because when I hold the wrapper in my hand, this is completely flat, okay? So it's not, there is no sign of a crease. But what you can notice is that the printing is not basically discontinuous. It's obvious that something was in between there during the printing operation, and then it just fell off. And that's how the unprinted area occurred.
If I can just make a comment.
Sure.
I voted here, I don't know what it was, a month ago or whatever, in one of the preliminary local things here. And you lock everything into the electronic printing, and then you have to feed in your paper and it prints out all the results, which then you turn in and get verified or something. And I had a little tiny I voted sticker that you're supposed to put on your shirt after you leave. And somehow that fluttered out of my hand and landed on the sheet just as it got sucked into the machine. And so when it printed out the results, it partially, it printed on top of that and then kicked it out. So when I got the sheet back, there was a section just like this or the previous printing where it had missed. So I would surmise that something fell onto the press, printed on it, and then slipped off. And that's probably where your missing print went.
Yes, that is, this is a condition that is more often than you can think. I mean, in the EFO collector, we had a picture of talking about things falling off onto the, during printing. We had an example from John Hutchner where actually a fly was stuck on there, and you see the rest of the fly basically. I guess the fly encountered a bitter end. So now here is another Argentinian wrapper, and this is not totally as clear whether some objects fell on the paper or whether it was ink starvation. But my theory is that something fell on the paper, and the reason I think that is if you are looking at the edges of this, of the unprinted area, it's kind of reasonably sharp. If it has, when it is ink starvation, usually, the ink tends to run out and create like a gradual pattern. And this is not the case here. The other ones is more questionable, the other missing areas, but I believe what happened is here that a number of small, pieces of paper or whatever, dust items or something like that fell on, and that they prevented the printing. Here is another one. This is kind of more unusual, but it is considered a major error because it has its own actually catalog number. If you look here, the F is missing from Faja Postal, right? This is the normal one. the F has not been printed, and there is no sign of printing at all. You know, sometimes you see it, you know, you see a sign that a printing head has hit the paper, although this is unlikely in this case because this is in lithography, so that wouldn't happen really. You see something like, you know, a trace when it is like letterpress or something like that, but nevertheless, the thing is missing, the F is missing cleanly, there is no sign of it, so I have to assume that there was something there that fell in. So now we are going to set-offs. So I'm going to show a number of set-offs, and remember that we saw originally one that was with excess ink. This is a British wrapper that is embossed, and on the left side you have a scan from the front, and on the right side is the same wrapper from the back. And if you look at this, it's actually an extraordinarily good set-off. You see a lot of details. Often when a set-off occurs, the set-off is not very well defined, and we'll see that too. But in this case, for sure, this is very unusual. When I purchased this wrapper, actually, let me tell you that the seller had no idea about this. I got it at a normal price. I didn't pay a surcharge for a set-off, which to me makes it much more interesting. So often sellers don't know what they are selling on eBay. Some do, but many don't. And because few people collect wrappers, it's even unlikelier that they will know what they are selling as a wrapper, even if they may know what they are selling as a stamp. So it's a good place to find EFOs, wrapper EFOs, eBay or the other marketplaces. Now here is a German one. Again, the left one is from the front, and the right one is from the back. And this is also an extraordinarily well definition of the set-off. However, of course, only the printed area is the mirror image. The embossing is not the mirror image, obviously. This is another case of an Argentinian wrapper. It's actually the first wrapper that Argentina used, and it was printed by the American Banknote Company. It has a set-off that is also fairly well defined, not quite as well as the others we saw, but it is a nice impression. And here is, I mentioned to you that we will see this wrapper again. This is the front with excess ink. And on the right side, you see the back, and an enlargement of the indicium seen from the back. This is more typical of a set-off because it is really partial, and that is, you know, what normally happens. Now here, the next item that we have is actually quite interesting, and it's more than what it looks like. If you look at the whole wrapper on the right side, you will notice that it's an albino. Here, you can see the embossing of the indicium, so there is no printing in the front, no printing of the color. There is just the embossing. On the other hand, in the back, there is a well-defined set-off. So clearly what happened is This was probably stuck to the back of another wrapper. Therefore, the front didn't get an impression of the color, and the back got a set off because the prior wrapper, the prior sheet had not quite dried yet. So this is really neat when you have, two EFO items on one wrapper. Next, I'm going to show you this wrapper. You might or you might not remember it, but I had some time ago, over a year ago probably, a presentation on wrappers, on collecting wrappers, or rather, was it called? No, it was about wrappers of this organization, pre-canceled wrappers. This is a pre-canceled wrapper, and as you see in the back, there is a fairly well-defined set-off, and this is here an enlargement of that. Now, what is fascinating here is the following. On the right, you will see a picture that I took, and the set-off is actually on the back of the wrapper. I would have expected it to be on the other side of the paper, but it's not on the other side of the paper, it's on the back of the wrapper. To me, what this tells me is that these wrappers, first of all, they were printed in sheets of 10, so it was like a high, sheets of 10, and then they were cut apart, obviously, but they were also folded and glued, and then they were given to the post office to be for the indicia to be applied. So I think that's kind of fascinating because, first of all, I've never seen a case like that where some processing happens, although there is one more that is similar but not as elaborate, and we'll get into that. But it is interesting that they would do that. I would have never thought that they would fold them before giving them to the post office. So it is interesting that also it's one of those cases where an EFO tells you something about how the item was manufactured. I have never read anything about, folding before applying the indicium. So that is, it might well be that it is something that I discovered that maybe others didn't recognize. At least there is nothing was published about that. Now, the next I want to go to color and paper variations. So one thing about wrappers that was very different from stamps for sure, but also from other postal stationery like postcards and letter cards and so on. Wrappers were usually printed on the lowest quality of available paper. And further, and I'm referring now to the post office printed wrappers, not the stamp to order wrappers. The stamp to order wrappers, obviously there is no quality control because whoever wants it stamped just brings any paper that they have to the post office and they say, oh, can you apply some indicia here for me? But when the post office prints it, then it is a different story because you would think that they would apply some quality controls, and indeed they do, but the type of paper often varies tremendously. Here you see the same wrapper in on paper in 3 different shades, on basically a grayish brown, on a whitish, and then the top one is in a color referred to as buff. And we'll get into that on the next slide, but you will see that it also somewhat affects the color of the indicium and of the rest. So it kind of creates an unevenness also in the color of the printing, not just it's that the paper is different. By the way, also US wrappers were often printed, on the cheapest wrapper, a type of paper, often manila paper that was never used for any other postal printing. And you will find cases where some wrappers were printed on a type of paper that's kind of acceptable, and then they probably ran out of paper and they just said manila paper at end. They continued printing on that one. So you find that with US wrappers too. I don't have any examples in this presentation. But here is an Argentinian wrapper in different, first of all, as you see, the paper itself is in a number of different shades that vary tremendously. And I can tell you that these are not just due to the artifacts of the scanner, because often, of course, when you scan things, at different times on different scanners, you get different tones. These were scanned at basically on the same wrapper, on the same day, on the same scanner, on the same date. So they should have been all basically the same color shade and the same paper shade, but they are not. And you can see the top 3 wrappers actually in particular, they are on a brownish paper, whereas the others are more on a light buff type paper. And I believe that one of these, and I don't remember which one, is actually printed on a very thin paper that is often referred to as onion type paper. So you find all kinds of papers. And the indicium is also in different shades. And it is in different shade not just because the underlying paper is of different color. It is the makeup of the ink was different, obviously. This, I don't believe this qualifies as error, but it is certainly a strong variation. This one, for example, is completely different than from the top one. Next, there are 2 wrappers that have rejection markings. So essentially, you find rejection markings actually a lot of on US material. And what these are is as the printing goes on and the paper web flows, somebody looks at the paper, and if they find something that should be taken out later, they just will go and do a marking with some, usually a grease pen or something like that, something in red or something in blue. And then that would be a sign to the people later who are doing the quality control to remove that from the end product. And maybe they miss it sometimes, or maybe they take it out and then they take it home, depending. These wrappers were printed by Casa de Moneda, Argentinian printer. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing had actually, where they use a lot rejection markings, had fairly onerous quality controls and security controls about taking stuff out. Not to say that stuff wasn't smuggled out, but it is relatively rare. In Casa de Moneda, I don't know how liberal it was or how well controlled it was. So it's hard to say whether that was sold over a post office counter as a true EFO should be sold, or whether it was, acquired through dubious means. But right now they are in my hands, and I certainly appreciate having these rejection markings. Next, we are getting to basically my favorite area of this presentation, which are the design errors. In some way, the design errors are in a different category by themselves, because A design error means that there is something wrong in the design of a stamp. And when there is something wrong in the design of a stamp, generally all the stamps are printed from the same die, and therefore they all have it. And therefore, such an error in most cases has no really additional value because every copy of the stamp or wrapper has it. However, they can be a lot of fun. So here is number one about talking about having fun. So these were printed, these are Brazilian wrappers that were printed by the American banknote company. And so I guess the designer didn't take geography in high school or in college and didn't know that they use Portuguese in Brazil rather than Spanish, or maybe he didn't know enough to tell the difference between Portuguese and Spanish. Whatever may have happened, most of the printing is in Portuguese, except 20 is in Spanish, meaning 20. So these were printed and delivered to the Brazilian authorities, and guess what? There was an uproar. They were up in arms. They felt insulted about the idea that they would receive, because, as you know, in particular at the time, often, postal items, stamps and such, were considered kind of a sign of basically national identity almost, right? So that was like an insult to the national identity to have this partially printed in Spanish. So they basically took them out of sale and destroyed most of them. Some survived. I would say that the ones with the error unused, you can find them. Used, they are very rare, and I'm sure they're at a price level that I cannot afford. No, the American banknote company sometime later realized the problem, was probably notified, and they corrected the design. 20 is 20 in, guess what, in Portuguese. So they reprinted the wrapper and delivered a new batch. So I'm guessing that they took a loss on that one because they just didn't have the good sense of proofreading carefully what they printed. Talking
Cemil?
about, yes,
Today, in Brazil, they spell Brazil with an S rather than a Z. Now, I don't know if that was true back then.
that's
but
a good point. Yes,
yeah.
I have to look into that. Rosanna, how do they spell Brazil in Spanish? In Spanish, it is spelled with S. So it must have been that it is spelled now at the time it was spelled with Z. Or
it's the English spelling.
English, yes. Could it be English? So I have never read anything about this being printed partially in English. That's why I didn't mention that. Certainly you read plenty about that being printed partially in Spanish. So that's why, but I will do some research on that. Now, talking about proofreading and language, this is like, okay, it was printed in the US by some slobs who didn't know Spanish, who didn't know Portuguese. But what about this next one? This one was printed in Argentina. Yet they still managed to misspell the name of their country. Instead of República, as it is shown at the bottom, they spelled República. So they juxtaposed the C and the A, the C and the L. So, and not only that, they had actually no problem selling that and I'm not showing it here, but I have also a used example of this. So, and a commercially used example. So they had no qualms about using it. So what this shows is that, you know, they had here, they really didn't have proofreading capabilities, you know. At the other one, at least, they didn't have proofreading capabilities, including language. Here, they didn't do proofreading, period. Or else when they realized it, they didn't want to have wasted the paper. That's another theory. Whatever, you know, you like, that's the theory. Now here is another case. The top two wrappers we saw actually earlier. These are the miscut ones. But they have an additional problem. If you look here at Fahia, Fahia is spelled with 2 L's, but on these wrappers, they are spelled with 3 L's. So, and both the one as well as the two peso values are spelled wrong. So I guess they use basically they use the same plates or whatever to print the different colors, and you know, and so they had the same error, the same Fahia error, both in the brown one as well as in the green one.
Well, again, in defense of the proofreader here, there's a US wine stamp that has dollars spelled with 3 L's. And I remember reading a comment by someone who wrote into Lynn's or to the AP or whatever, who said that he had worked professionally as a proofreader, and that the hardest thing to see as a proofreader is 3 L's instead of 2.
Fascinating. Thanks for that tidbit. So there it is. But these errors are, first of all wrappers of this year, they have the same error. So there is not a version with 2 L's. There are, however, this design in different variation was used on Brazilian wrappers, as well as other like postal stationery, such as on postal cards. It was used very extensively, and it exists with 2 L's, you know, in all of the others except for this one. Now, next we go to unissued wrappers. So you don't find that many versions of that many unissued type wrappers. Occasionally you do. I am sure that somewhere I saw an example of an unissued wrapper, but I don't remember honestly what it was. But actually there is one that I know I saw, I don't remember. There is one that I saw, I remember, but I don't have a copy. And then there is this one. So this one, these were prepared as specimens for Belgium. And Belgium never issued newspaper wrappers. So these were, I'm guessing, eventually cut apart and sold. So these are qualify, in my opinion, as unissued wrappers. The other one that I know of its existence is that there is Luxembourg never issued wrappers, but there is an essay of a Luxembourg wrapper, of a wrapper prepared for Luxembourg, that looks very similar to a Württemberg wrapper that was never issued. The Luxembourg wrapper essay was never issued. That one is also fairly rare. So you do find them occasionally, but you know, just occasionally. Now, counterfeits, fakes, intentionally created varieties that exists frequently, but you know, it is with wrappers, there is here a difference, okay? And the difference is that most of wrappers are, one could claim, intentionally created varieties if they are stamped to order, or in the US wrappers, what you will find is the US didn't issue stamp to order wrappers. You couldn't take your paper to the post office to get the stamp printed on it. However, what was used extremely extensively were overprinted wrappers. In other words, a company would go and buy wrappers from the post office and then overprint them. So that certainly is an intentionally created varieties. But then there are, to me, there is an element here of separating maybe stamp collectors from the hard-earned money, or maybe cheating the post office. Something like that has to happen in order, the way I see it, for a wrapper or an item to be in this category. Now here was a stamp dealer from Halifax, Nova Scotia, a certain Henry Hedler, who was a stamp dealer, but also was a commander in a Canadian battalion, volunteer battalion. So at some point, he took these perfectly nice Canadian wrappers and overprinted them. At least that's the ongoing theory. There is no indication that these were ever printed by any postal authority for postal use. So therefore, it fits, in my opinion, in this category. Then there is another type that I'm not showing here, which is where people may have taken, for example, there are Russian wrappers that were overprinted when the Russian Tsar visited France. They were overprinted and with a memo, with a printing that memorialized the visit and sold to collectors. So that wasn't for a postal use. Strictly speaking, it was to separate collectors from the hard-earned money. So it is kind of in between there, but I don't have a copy of that. Here is another one. And as I mentioned before, for the Seebecks, Nicholas Seebeck could actually, after the year was over, got the presses and could print as many of these items as he wanted in his private workshop and sell them. And you couldn't differentiate them from the original because they were printed off the original dies. Something similar happened with Heligoland wrappers and actually stamps. After the Heligoland became part of, I believe, Germany. I'm not totally sure because, as you know, it flip-flopped between Germany and England several times. And as a matter of fact, if you look at this, there are two currencies on this one, farthings and pfennigs. Whatever it may be, I read that this printing equipment was also sold to people who proceeded to print such items. So I have some reason to believe that this one may not be a fake as such. However, it very likely also might be. It's hard to say. At least the way I see it as an example, it falls into this category. About variety. Here is another thing that's interesting. That's a different type of variety in the sense that it is an essay. It is an essay by Nesbitt, a printer, that was printed actually on US paper. It was never issued as a post office, excuse me. It was never issued as a post office wrapper, but it is a legitimate essay, and it is, let me put it this way, it is scarce. You don't find them very frequently. And I showed here on the left a picture taken against a backlight. I find that also the watermark is particularly nice and on this particular wrapper. So it is a legitimate essay. So it falls into the essays, proofs, and specimens category. Specimens, I'm not showing any other specimens, although specimens were very widely used with newspaper wrappers. You may have noticed that before I had lots of Argentinian wrappers overprinted muestra, which are specimens. There are a number of reasons why items were overprinted with specimens, and that is, I guess it's such a large subject that it's maybe for another presentation. So finally, we are coming to the last slide, and I titled this one as Pure Sloppiness. So from the experience that I have, the postal authority that was the sloppiest in printing indicia in the stamp to order cases was no contest. It was the Austrian authorities. They printed indicia on anything that you would bring them. So probably what would happen in this case is the authorities, the company applied these address sheets on unstamped paper sheets, took these paper sheets to the government printer, and the government printer applied the indicia. And they were probably, my guess is that they were in sheets of probably 10 or 5 at 6 probably. So they were in larger sheets, and before use they were cut apart. In this particular case, as you can see, the indicium was partially on the label and partially on the wrapper paper itself. Again, that was no reason to waste a wrapper that had been paid for, so they proceeded to use it. And I think that it is a prime example of showing how sloppy the Austrian authorities were in printing these wrappers. So that's the last one that I have. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me say that these are not all the possible errors. This is not complete. There are more than that, but time is limited, so I had to pick and choose some of them. That's about it.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, questions for Cemil?
This is Mike Bach. Cemil, if you could go back to the slide with the Queen Elizabeth, it's fairly close to the beginning.
Victoria.
No, Queen Elizabeth, the two color turquoise and other.
Yes.
There we go. What struck me about this is the cancellation.
Okay.
Is that because I collect quite a lot of British postmarks, and this is a style that was issued by the British Post Office in the late 19th, early 20th century. And if you note, it says Stamford Mercury. Well, Stamford is a town in Lincolnshire, one of the oldest papers in the country. it disputes it with another town in Worcestershire. Mercury, that's the name of the local newspaper, the Stamford Mercury, and the post office from time to time would issue a special cancel for a newspaper. And it seems like, and 742 was the post office designated number for Stamford in Lincolnshire. It's interesting that they continue to use the same cancellation format that was issued in the late 19th, early 20th century.
So this is an
the time of Queen Victoria.
This is a
Time of Queen
pre-cancel.
Elizabeth.
This is a pre-cancel that was used for a very long period of time.
Yeah.
If I remember, all the way into the 60s maybe, and they used it. I'll show you another example. Oops. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to create a PDF for sure. Okay. This will take a second, probably.
Yeah, but I have a book on British cancels, and it actually refers to that and has an example of that cancel from the late 19th, early 20th century. So it's really interesting that they were still using it at the time of Queen Elizabeth.
Okay. So here is.
Yep.
I have struggled with this one. This is one that I bought.
Uh-huh.
I am trying to find out whether this would be like after they stopped using the pre-cancels within this year or before they started even to use them. The printing style looks fairly late to me, but I don't know. Maybe if you have any information on when this was used, it would be interesting to find out.
But that style, Cemil, was issued by the post office to the Stamford Mercury back in the late 19th, early 20th century.
So you are saying that that was an early, then
yeah, it's one
one.
that the cancellation itself is a design that was issued by the post office, assigned to the Stamford Mercury, and they've continued to use it ever since.
So I'm trying to show them another different.
I have a stamp or cancel from Williamsburg, and it's like it's a retro.
Yep.
And
There
that's
you
what this looks like.
Yeah.
They just revived it for something, historical.
So all the way through from the time of Queen Victoria till through Queen Elizabeth, the Stamford Mercury used the same cancellation.
Yes.
Because post offices in England now do not use the numbers. And that's what piqued my interest.
Yeah, this is interesting. I have a number of these. Unfortunately, the earliest one that I have is really King George VI. I don't have any earlier ones with this cancel. I was just checking.
I'll send you the page. I'll scan the page that I've got from the book that references it.
I really would appreciate that.
No problem.
Paul can give you my email, so you can just email it to me.
Yeah, will do.
You remind me, Mike. And Mike, maybe show that for show and tell next month. That image from that book.
Yep. Can do.